Hey there, history buffs and casual observers. John Oliver here, ready to dive into a conflict that's often overshadowed but absolutely crucial, the Korean War. Picture this, 1950, the world's still reeling from World War II, and bam, Korea becomes the battleground for a whole new kind of conflict. The Cold War turning very, very hot. North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union and China, decided they wanted to unite the Korean peninsula under communist rule. South Korea, supported by the United States and the United Nations, said, "Thanks, but no thanks." And thus began a brutal 3-year war that would claim millions of lives and reshape the geopolitical landscape. This wasn't just some regional squabble, folks. It was a proxy war between superpowers, a clash of ideologies, and a terrifying glimpse into what a full-blown nuclear war might look like. The stakes were incredibly high, and the battles were some of the most intense and brutal in modern history. So buckle up as we break down 4 key battles of the Korean War, exploring the strategies, the sacrifices, and the lasting consequences of this forgotten war. Trust me, this is one history lesson you won't want to sleep through. Imagine being pushed back, cornered, clinging on for dear life. That was the situation for South Korean and UN forces in the summer of 1950. The North Korean army, armed with Soviet tanks and driven by revolutionary zeal, had overrun much of South Korea, pushing the defenders back to a small pocket of territory in the southeast corner of the peninsula. This desperate stand took place around the port city of Pusan, forming a defensive line known as the Pusan Perimeter. Outnumbered and outgunned, the UN forces, led by the tenacious General Walton Walker, dug in, determined to hold on until reinforcements could arrive. The Battle of Pusan Perimeter raged for 6 long weeks. North Korean attacks were relentless, testing the UN lines again and again. American air power proved crucial, hammering enemy positions and supply lines. The South Korean army, though battered, fought with incredible courage, knowing their very existence was on the line. Finally, in September 1950, the tide began to turn. Reinforcements poured in, bolstering the UN forces. Exhausted and depleted, the North Korean offensive faltered. The Pusan Perimeter held, marking a crucial turning point in the war. It bought precious time for the UN forces to regroup and plan a counterattack that would change the course of the war. General Douglas MacArthur, the flamboyant and often controversial commander of UN forces, saw an opportunity. While the North Koreans were focused on Pusan, he planned a daring amphibious landing behind enemy lines at the port city of Inchon. The Inchon Landing, launched on September 15, 1950, was a masterpiece of military planning and execution. Marines stormed ashore at Inchon, a city with treacherous tides and heavily fortified defenses. The North Koreans, caught completely off guard, were sent reeling. The impact of Inchon was immediate and dramatic. The North Korean supply lines were cut, and their forces in the south were trapped. Panic spread through the North Korean ranks as UN forces advanced rapidly from both the north and the south. Within weeks, Seoul, the South Korean capital, was recaptured. The North Korean army, once seemingly invincible, was in full retreat. MacArthur's gamble had paid off, turning the tide of the war in favor of the UN forces. As UN forces pushed north, they encountered a new and formidable enemy, the Chinese People's Volunteer Army. Mao Zedong, fearing a UN victory, sent hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops into Korea. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir, fought in the brutal cold of a Korean winter, became a defining moment in the war. In November 1950, the US X-Corps, largely made up of Marines, found themselves surrounded by a massive Chinese force near the Chosin Reservoir. What followed was one of the most harrowing battles in American military history. Outnumbered and facing sub-zero temperatures, the Marines fought with incredible tenacity. They battled not only the Chinese, but also frostbite, exhaustion, and dwindling supplies. Section 5. Heartbreak on Hill 931. The Battle of Heartbreak Ridge. The Battle of Heartbreak Ridge, fought in September and October 1951, exemplified the brutal nature of the Korean War. This fight for a series of heavily fortified hills near the 38th parallel became a symbol of the war's grinding stalemate. The U.S. Army's 2nd Infantry Division was tasked with capturing Heartbreak Ridge, a key piece of terrain. The Chinese, dug in and determined, fought fiercely. The fighting was savage and hand-to-hand, with heavy casualties on both sides. After weeks of intense fighting, UN forces finally captured Heartbreak Ridge. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Thousands of soldiers were killed or wounded, and the ridge itself was a desolate wasteland. The battle highlighted the human cost of the war and the difficulty of breaking the stalemate. Section 6. Stalemate and the war's end. By 1951, the Korean War had devolved into a brutal stalemate. Neither side could achieve a decisive victory, and the front lines stabilized near the 38th parallel, roughly the pre-war border. The next 2 years were marked by bloody but inconclusive fighting, with both sides digging in and fortifying their positions. Truce talks began in July 1951 but dragged on for 2 years, hampered by disagreements over prisoner exchange and the location of the border. Finally, on July 27, 1953, an armistice agreement was signed, ending the fighting. Section 7. The Korean War's enduring legacy. The Korean War, though often overshadowed, left an indelible mark on the world. It solidified the division of Korea, creating 2 separate states with vastly different ideologies and systems of government. It also intensified the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, fueling an arms race and proxy conflicts around the globe. The war had a profound impact on the Korean people, dividing families and leaving a legacy of pain and distrust. Millions of Koreans were killed or wounded, and the peninsula was devastated by years of fighting. Section 8. The Forgotten War. Not quite. The Korean War is often referred to as the Forgotten War, overshadowed by World War II and the Vietnam War. However, it was a pivotal conflict with far-reaching consequences. It demonstrated the dangers of Cold War tensions, the importance of international cooperation, and the human cost of ideological conflicts. Section 9. Korea. Today, a divided peninsula. Today, Korea remains divided, a stark reminder of the Cold War's enduring legacy. South Korea, a vibrant democracy with a thriving economy, stands in stark contrast to North Korea, an isolated and authoritarian state with a history of human rights abuses. Section 10. Lessons from the Brink. The importance of remembering the Korean War. The Korean War serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked aggression, the importance of diplomacy, and the human cost of war. It is a conflict that should not be forgotten, its lessons heeded by future generations. By remembering the sacrifices made and the lessons learned, we can strive for a more peaceful and just world.